everyone. I'm Elizabeth Hines, and welcome to another edition of Coast Connections. Today, we're connecting with eagles, estuaries, and some eco-enthusiasts who are actually building an artificial nest here on Vancouver Island for an eagle preserve that we're hoping will be the first one on Vancouver Island. It's a wonderful project, and I hope that you can get behind it and support this once you hear about the exciting things that they're doing here at French Creek. Joining me today, we have Denise Foster from the Save Estuary Land Society. Hello, Denise.
Hi, Liz. Great to be here.
Nice to see you. And I think you're in Parksville today, or area, right?
That's right, I am.
Welcome to Coast Connections.
Thanks.
And joining us is your friend and colleague, David Hancock. Hello, David.
Hello, Elizabeth. How are you?
Very well, thank you. And David, you're a world-renowned eagle expert. You're also a biologist, you're an author, you're a publisher, and people might also know you from Hancock House Publishing. And you've published over 600 books on a lot to do with conservation. So you're a real expert and a wealth of information that we're going to tap into today. So you two are a great tag team working on this project to save some wonderful estuary land at the French Creek location on Vancouver Island. So let's talk about these eagles. Right now, David, we have this amazing migration going on. I didn't realize until I spoke to you the other day that there's a real difference between a breeding eagle and a wintering eagle. Tell us the difference and tell us who's coming into our territory right now by the thousands.
Sure. Well, it's all about perspective, because I'm speaking of breeding eagles, meaning breeding eagles here. The eagles that have migrated or are migrating into here right now, in addition to first our breeding eagles arrived about a month and a half ago, and they're all set up on their territories, and they're sitting around the territories, and if a new eagle passes by, they scream and say, please keep going, or I don't think they use the word please. And then we have now just arriving the eagles that actually are the breeders from the tundra and the taiga forest across northern Canada and Alaska. And they breed up there in the summer. Ours start to breed now, but they don't lay their eggs until February or March, but they're holding the territories here. But up there, it's of course freezing up now.
Right.
And so all the lakes on which their nests are located are now getting locked in under ice. And so there's no food available. So they move south, and they are our big, huge wintering population of eagles, and they're just starting to arrive. Last weekend, we had 2,828 eagles on the Harrison River because there's a lot of dead, spawned out fish on the Harrison. So they were enjoying the feast. Occasionally, our breeding eagles will go to local rivers, but they need to stay around their nests. So they don't want to go very far at this season. But the northern birds are free to go wherever they want because they're not going to go back north and go breeding until end of March or April. So they're down here for the winter. They're the snowbirds of the Alaska or of the northern Canada eagle population. They're here for their warm, balmy winter.
And David, I think you mentioned there's 35 to 40,000 of these eagles in our coastal region right now. And Denise, a lot of them.
Yeah, they're starting to come now, just starting. The peak of them will be here in December.
Very good. And Denise, a lot of these amazing eagles, these raptors, are going to be landing at the French Creek Estuary, which is a really jewel of an ecological site. Between sort of Parksville and Qualicum Beach on Vancouver Island, for those who might not know it. Tell us a little bit about how special this estuary land is. You've provided us with a really lovely video here on the intro to French Creek, and we're just going to roll that. If you could just talk us through that and the amazing creatures and the biodiversity that exists there.
Sure, thanks, Liz. Well, French Creek Estuary Land is about 23 acres, and it's this incredible natural forest, older growth, and its biodiversity has remained virtually intact. It supports hundreds of different wildlife species, not just eagles, but hawks and owls and river otters and beaver and couple hundred songbirds and other birds pass through here, migrating every year, and brant geese. It's actually got three sensitive ecosystems that are considered rare on Vancouver Island are found on this property. And so we're really keen to protect it for the wildlife that use it and depend upon it.
Mhm. And you're keen to protect it because right now it's under threat of development. And the French Creek House has donated very generously almost 18 acres of this land, Denise, and for a preserve, not just for eagles, but for other species as well. And your group and David's group is looking to fundraise for the other 5 acres that you need for this.
Yeah, this is an amazing opportunity. It's not that often you get a landowner who's a developer who wants to donate land for conservation. So we're just so fortunate that they're being so
Mhm.
generous. There's 5 acres that are remaining that they'd like to sell, and they'd prefer to sell that to add to the Eagle Preserve that David so wisely suggested we try to create here. It would be the first Eagle Preserve on Vancouver Island and one of only 3 in all of British Columbia. So it'd be a really special place.
Very much so. Now, David, being the eagle expert that you are, um, the nests, I've always wondered how on earth any bird starts to build a nest. But you not only know that, you've actually built an eagle's nest. Last September, you built an artificial eagle's nest. Tell us a little bit about that process and how do you do that?
Well, we do it quite differently than eagles do, but I spent 60 something years of my life watching eagles at nest, building their sites. It's a real challenge for them to get the appropriate crotch in a tree where they can carry up a big enough branch that locks across 2 other branches in the tree. And that becomes a kind of foundational. Then they add more and more branches on top of that. But they can only lift 1.5, 2.5 pounds. They might get a slightly bigger branch if they knock it off a tree way high up and they're gliding downhill with it or down the slope and get that into the tree crotch. But what we can do when we build nests, we're able to take branches that are 20, 30 pounds and they're good, solid, durable branches. And we're able to lock these into the tree. And we form, and we've done this not just once, but we've done it dozens and dozens of times. We've created eagle nests. And by making this foundational series of usually it's about 8, 9 big branches. And then on top of that, we bring in another 50 or so smaller branches and kind of weave it all together. But we have the advantage also of having stainless steel straps that we can lock one to the other and zap straps that we can tie other ones into it. So we get this whole structure firmly locked into the tree. And that makes it quite durable. Where eagle nests, I mean, I have watched one pair of eagles build 4 nests, 3 nests in the same tree, one after the other, and they'd get it 3/4 built and it would fall out. And then they'd start again and it would fall. It took them all summer. They'd finally build a 4th nest toward the end of summer, and they actually got that one to stay in another tree, and they raised 3 young. But so they work at this. They work very hard to make it work out. The challenge is eagles cannot readily find that initial big crotch into which they can start a nest because, as you know, today, big trees along the waterfront are nearly all cut down for development. So their challenge is finding an adequate tree to hold a nest. And that's what we do. We find the tree and we form the basic structure and they build it. And if you go to our website, and people hopefully will do that, all our cameras in the Lower Mainland, or most of them, are in nests that we've built, and they're very successful.
David, I'll never be able to ask this twice, so I'll have to ask you, what is it like to sit in an eagle's nest?
Well, it's exciting. I've never laid an egg, however. I have to make that very clear. But I've been into a great many nests. I mean, when I was a young kid, I was climbing the nest to band the young eaglets and so on. Now I don't actually climb the trees anymore. I go up in a lift which is a man lift. And some of these, sometimes it's a crane, a 200-foot crane will lift me up there. But I have an associate, Miles, who is a wonderful climber, and he's still at that foolish young age where he'll climb the tree. Oh, I shouldn't say that, but he climbs the trees. And
I'm
so
just
if
going
I
to
can't,
add,
yeah, if I can't get up there with the lift, he and I often build the nest, but I have other people who help me as well. But if we have to send him up the nest, which is what we did up the tree, which is what we did at French Creek, we couldn't get a lift near that tree. And so we actually sent Miles up the tree, and he built a fine nest. And as you probably know, you have some pictures of the eagles just after we built it. They've come and landed in the nest, and they're possibly modifying it, but we're not sure the pair we hoped was going to nest in it are going to. We think maybe another pair is going to nest in it, because the original pair, which was up by the highway, has actually built another nest in the very next tree to the nest that they first nested in. And that tree was the one that was cut down after we built them a nest. The developer cut down the original nest, and now the eagles have built a new nest right next door in the next tree. And so which ones they're going to end up nesting in, time will tell. They will make their best choice.
I have to say, David, for our viewers, that you're an octogenarian, and most people your age are not going up in a 120-foot lift into an eagle's nest. They're ordering their home acorn stair lift. So you're pretty impressive. Good for you.
Well,
Now,
I enjoy
Denise.
it. I mean, it's exciting and it's fulfilling to build to help these great birds out. I mean, I've spent 65 years watching developers cut trees down, but it's only very recently that the Fish and Wildlife Branch in our new government has taken the position that they're not allowing that anymore. That has come to an end, thank goodness. And so we come in and we propose what we call a mitigation project. We come up with where eagles could have an alternate nest, and then if we either build it in a tree for them, or we sometimes we even install a pole with a nest on top if there are no trees left. So it's quite satisfying to in the past we just had to stand by and watch them all the nests come down, and today we're building a substitute so we can keep those eagles breeding in places like French Creek, which is such a rich ecological area. I mean, it's an unbelievably rich area. There's 4 or 5 eagles nests within a mile.
Amazing.
Yes, it's a wonderful.
It's a real jewel. Yeah.
And that's Denise, why we want to make it into a sorry to interrupt you, but that's why we want to make this into a eagle preserve, because eagles are symbolic of it being ecologically very diverse, because eagles are at the top of the food chain, and it tells you well that this entire ecosystem is doing well if a pair of eagles can live there.
Denise, this beautiful estuary land there in French Creek, and your group has been involved how long now to try and preserve this area from development?
Well, we're working in partnership with the Friends of French Creek Conservation Society, and they've actually been boots on the ground trying to protect this land for 16 years. And the society I'm with, the Save Estuary Land Society, we've been at it for 2.5 years. And now we've come together and we've joined forces as a partnership, working together to try to conserve it as a natural area.
And you've got beautiful trails in that area. There's lovely spaces to walk. There's a beautiful pond, and the diversity, like the herons that come there, the horned owls, and I think you mentioned about 130 species of different birds. And of course, the migration of the brant that come to the area every year is another spectacular reason why we need to preserve this land. And also the herring run. And you provided us with a picture of many, many eagles. I think a group of eagles is called a convocation, but this convocation of eagles swooping and diving all around there after the herring. It's just nature's banquet, this estuary land, and we really do need to preserve it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there's some unique events that happen here at French Creek. We have We're known as a windy area. The kite surfers come here a lot. And the wind and the surf from the Salish Sea really churns up a lot of food. So we even have, thousands of horse clams thrown up into the shoreline, and eagles come by the hundreds to feast on those, as well as the video you're talking about where they were diving on herring. And then I think David said it's a record in his 66 years of observing eagles. He counted 204 eagles in a frame diving on a big fishball of hake. And that was right here at French Creek. And then from there, they need to rest and they need to dry, and they fly onto the big trees and perch. And so sometimes you can look up there and see, 100, 120 eagles perched right here on this land. It's amazing.
Spectacular. That's so beautiful.
I'd like to add one thing, because you mentioned it, but it's the first time Denise took some photos of the horse clams kind of being probably cut back by the winds eroding the sandy beaches when they're down in the sand. And so all of a sudden these great horse clams, which are pounds each, are on the surface. And the eagles are coming down and taking advantage of that. And that's the first time I'd ever seen this. And I said that to her. She said, "Oh, well, I'll send you another video." And then she sent me one from the previous year of them doing the same thing. So while I had never seen eagles eating horse clams, my goodness, it's apparently a regular dessert up there, a regular meal. Yeah.
And Denise, you've also provided us with or it might have been David, from one of your eagle cams, a video called Growing Up an Eagle. And it's about 2 minutes here. And I'd just like you to talk us through that, David. It shows the parents feeding the small little gray eaglets. Talk us through this, and how long does it take for eagle egg to hatch? And how long before they fledge?
Well, it takes, eagles lay their eggs 3 days apart usually, and they sit on them sometimes with the first egg. So that the first egg begins to incubate immediately, because they bring the temperature up and that starts the germ cell dividing. And it takes about 36 to 37 days for an eagle's egg to hatch. Now, 3 days after the first egg is laid, they lay the second egg, and occasionally, not regularly, but occasionally, they will lay a third egg. And that's another 3 days apart. So the chicks, because they still take 36 days or so to hatch, the chicks end up hatching 3 days apart. Now, sometimes the eagle doesn't really sit on the eggs tight, doesn't bring the temperature up to start the incubation for a few days. And so sometimes the eggs hatch more quickly, more closely together. But generally it's 36 days to 37 to hatch. Then they take, from the day of hatching, 83 to 85 days to make their first flight. Occasionally they get blown out of the nest a little early, or they're doing wing exercises, and a gust catches them and they go to the ground before they intended. So sometimes they fledge early, but generally it's about 83 days to making their first flight. And here's a really interesting biological fact. Many people tell me, "Oh, I saw a young eagle flying near that nest." I said, "Oh, how do you know it was young?" "Oh, it was very small." Well, the day an eagle chick leaves the nest on its first flight, that bird weighs more than that bird is ever going to be again in its life. It's bigger the day it leaves the nest than when it's mature. And its wingspan, when it leaves the nest, is 6 foot 6 inches. When that bird matures, it'll be only a 6 foot wingspan. So you don't see young eagles flying around the nest. What people occasionally see are red-tailed hawks flying around an eagle's nest.
Yeah.
And they confuse the two things, because when an eagle leaves the nest, it's bigger than it's ever going to be again in its life. Every year for the first 4 or 5, the bird gets a little bit smaller. Its feathers get a little bit shorter and more compact. And that's an adaptation to the bird learning more details about how to control all those feathers so it can fly more efficiently. and it doesn't need those great huge feathers and great longer wings to get around and glide. Because when they come out of that nest, for the next, they may stay around the nest for about a week, sometimes 10 days, but then they're going to migrate north to northern BC or Alaska. And they need those initially very big wings on which to soar and then glide downhill, because they don't fly on their migration. They basically glide downhill. They soar up to 3, 5, 8,000 feet, and then they glide down. So it's kind of an escalator for them. All the way to Alaska, they get a free ride. And coming back, they do the same thing. They get a free drift back again, because there's so many updrafts.
Mm-hmm. And David, like when they're feeding the young, they'll actually give one more than the other, right? Because if one is a slightly larger eaglet, they're going to get most of the food, I believe, in the nest.
Well, it's a slightly different approach than that. The first hatched, of course, is 3 days older than the second hatch generally. And so it's a little bit more competent. It's a little bit more aggressive. And if there's not enough food, then the first bird hatch generally gets most of the food. And the second bird or third bird, if there's not a lot of food, gets less and less. And so that bird within a week or 10 days, 2 weeks, is going to perish and doesn't make it. But in the French Creek area, because the area is so productive, almost every year that pair has produced 2 young. So and they laid 2 eggs and they produced 2 young. So that tells you that, number one, there was a lot of food because both chicks got fed. Because as soon as the first chick is fed and it's got a nice big crop, it then hasn't any real interest in further bullying for more food. So the second chick then comes forward and it gets fed. And in some nests, when that chick is fed, then the third one comes. And after they get so big, 3/4 big in this, they are able to compete for food quite effectively. But
and David, how old are they before they get their white head and white tail feathers? How old is an eagle then?
Maturity
When do they reach?
Maturity comes really on the 5th year. They have 4 different plumages: first, second, third, and 4th year, all basically brown. But on the 5th year, the head goes white and the tail goes white. There's still sometimes a few dark feathers in the head and a little black band on the tail. So you know it's a 5-year-old bird. But that's when they often enter the breeding population, when they're 5. But sometimes they don't get there until they're 6 because they haven't learned enough about dominance yet and so on. So that's a long life to have to live before you can reproduce, because most birds reproduce the first year.
Yeah. And how long does an eagle live in the wild if, they weren't threatened by development like they are right now at French Creek? How long is the lifespan of an eagle?
Well, we know that there's a number of eagles that are alive at 25, 27, 30 years of old, but that's still rare, relatively rare. Most birds don't live that long. So in captivity, eagles have lived 50 and 60 years. In fact, we think there's one 70 years old. So they have a potentially long-lasting life. It's just that the vicissitudes of nature always challenging them, and other eagles are challenging them. So life isn't quite so long in the wild as it can be in captivity. Exactly. But, so most of the mature birds are nesting for 8, 10, 15 years. We have one out at the Harrison Mills nest that's on our. It was there for 23 years.
Wow. And I understand a nest that you saw in Salt Spring was determined to be over 600 years old. And it was how big across? It was one of the biggest nests you've ever come across. Massive.
Yeah, it was in one of these great giant trees of the past. I mean, the bottom line is we've harvested almost all those big old trees. And this was a tree that I was using to count the number of eggs in the nest. And I was up in a helicopter one day looking into to count the eggs, and somebody took the photo of my helicopter, the helicopter I was in, beside the nest. And then I'm looking down taking pictures of the eagle sitting in its nest, and it stands up and you can see the egg. But you can see that from the fact that that bird is nearly 3 feet across, that nest is somewhere about 11 and a half feet across.
And what would that weigh?
It might have weighed maybe 1,500 pounds. There are nests that were weighed that were over 2,000 pounds, but those are in cottonwoods, usually in a different kind of area than we have here on the coast. We get too much weathering. Our nests are more likely to be 400 or 500 pounds, not 1,000 pounds, because they get weathered out by winter storms and so on. But that big tree was cut down a year after I took the photos, and a guy did a core sample, and it was 658 years old. And it's not impossible that that tree had a nest in it for 500 years.
Wow,
so what a wonderful, what a wonderful story those eagles could tell about the success of, what's happened to our area and the number of ancestors that they had produced out of that nest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
David, I'm just going to ask you to just halt on your perch for 1 second. Just want to bring back in Denise. And Denise, like, just to build one of these artificial nests is about $5,000. And your group built the one that was erected there in September of 2020 during the pandemic, I might add, which is a wonderful social distancing project. But how can viewers support the wonderful work that you are doing to try and preserve these beautiful animals and the biodiversity there in French Creek Estuary?
Yeah, absolutely. We're hoping and thinking that the community might support the creation of the Eagle Preserve. And they can do that by visiting the Friends of French Creek Conservation Society's website. And I think you might share the address for that on your screen. And ways to contribute would be to volunteer to help with many projects, or to contact us if they'd like more information. We can provide that for them. And especially to donate anything that they could afford. I know these times are a little tight, but every donation that's presented to us will go toward the purchase of that 5 acres of land, which would complete the preserve, and we'd have 23 acres of intact older growth forest. So
that's just a beautiful project, and it's something that I hope we can all get behind in some small way or big way. And if we can't donate money, maybe there's some volunteering that we can do. Each of you have amazing websites with stunning photographs and ways that our viewers can become involved. So I've got to wrap up here today, but I want to thank you both. You've just been wonderful guests. David Hancock from the Wildlife Foundation, the Hancock Wildlife Foundation, thank you. And Denise Foster from the Save Estuary Land Society. Good luck with your Eagle Preserve. And I want to thank you for coming on to, to tell us about this clause. Beak clause, it matters. So I hope you have very good luck saving this estuary and building those artificial nests to help our raptor friends out there and the other biodiversity that we need to protect and treasure. Thank you for joining us today.
It's all one thing.
Thank you so
That's
much.
a big clue
It
about
is.
it. Eagles are just symbolic of a good, healthy ecosystem.
Thanks again for joining us. And to our viewers, thank you for joining us. And remember, be safe, be well, and please, maybe consider becoming a volunteer or a contributor to this Save Estuary Land project and the Eagle Preserve that they're trying to create here on Vancouver Island. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Close Connections.